as we're waiting for people to come in, I'll tell you a little bit about Channel Islands Restoration. Oops, went too far. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We do habitat restoration contracting, environmental education, and environmental education. Did I say that twice? Environmental consulting and environmental education. Environmental education is very important. It's worth mentioning twice. That's what we're doing tonight, obviously. Tonight's presentation is Ash to Action, Heal the Bay's Post-Fire Water Quality Investigation webinar. And I'll be introducing our panelists in just a moment. Before I do, I'll show you this picture, and now we'll go into introductions. Tonight, we'll be hearing from three folks, including Tracy Quinn, who's Heal the Bay's Chief Executive Officer. Tracy serves as President and CEO of Heal the Bay. She leads a dynamic team of scientists, policy experts, outreach specialists, and educators in pursuit of its clean water mission. Tracy has dedicated her career to improving water quality in our rivers and ocean and ensuring safe, reliable, and affordable water for all Californians. Tracy started her career as an engineer designing water infrastructure in Southern California and working with municipal and industrial clients to improve water quality. Most recently, she served as the director of California's Urban Water Policy and the Natural Resources Defense Council, where she led efforts to pass and implement climate adaptation legislation and improve climate resilience and water affordability throughout California. Tracy received her bachelor's degree of science and master's of engineering in agricultural and biological engineering from Cornell University and is a licensed civil engineer in California. We'll also be hearing from Laura Rink, Associate Aquarium Director, Operations at Heal the Bay. Laura Rink is the Associate Director of Operations for the Heal the Bay Aquarium. In this role, Laura oversees the maintenance of aquarium exhibits, animal care, and diverse forward sustainability and conservation initiatives related to our local ocean ecosystems. After graduating with her bachelor's degree in aquatic biology, Laura has spent the last 15 years working in the aquarium industry at facilities housing diverse collections of aquatic life. Her previous positions included curator of the Rainforest Cafe in downtown Disney, senior aquarist at the California Science Center, and aquarist for the Calvert Marine Museum along the Chesapeake Bay. We'll also be hearing from Noel Held. Noel is assistant professor at USC Department of Biological Sciences Marine Environmental Biology Station. Noel Held is a biochemist and oceanographer. Through protomics. I even looked that up ahead of time and I still screwed it. Oh well, help me out with that, Noel, when we get to you. And quantitative microscopy studied the inner workings of microbial cells and how this scales up to ecological function and global scale processes. She received her PhD in chemical oceanography and microbial biochemistry from MIT and Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and was a postdoctoral fellow at ETH Zurich and the Swiss Federal Institute of Aquatic Sciences. She's also a registered yoga instructor. Pretty cool. So before we continue with the presentation, CIR does wish to acknowledge that the land that we do our restoration and educational work on is the unceded territory of the Chumash people. We pay our respect to the Chumash elders, past, present, and future, for they hold the memories, tradition, and culture of this land we work to protect. So with that, I will stop sharing and turn it over to you, John. You're on mute, by the way, John. We have John Ziegler with us, who's the marketing director at Channel Islands Restoration, who's helping out with this presentation tonight.
Okay, so I have the slideshow started and I'll just play it and we can start talking about the discussion.
So we'll go over to Tracy when you get that started.
Do you want me to just go for it and tell you a little bit about our testing?
Absolutely. Right in, please.
Great. So I think, first of all, just wanted to thank you, Ken and John, for providing us the opportunity to share a little bit about our work, and to, the 92 people who have joined us online. Thank you for caring about this work. I'm sure, everyone in America has now heard about the devastating fires that ravaged Los Angeles in early January. As the fires were burning, there were research boats that were out in the ocean, and they were observing that ash was being deposited onto the ocean surface up to 100 miles offshore. Since that time, we were able to see the devastation, to see the homes in some of these pictures. Many homes along the Pacific Coast Highway sat actually within the tidal zone. So high tide used to wash underneath them. As those homes burned, we now have piles of debris that are sitting on our beaches in that high tide zone. So every single day, pollutants from twisted metal and crushed concrete and broken glass, every hazardous contaminant you can have in a household. I know today's houses are made up mostly of plastic, from our couches to our rugs to our, many of the things in our home, and all of that burned and is sitting in debris piles throughout the Pacific Palisades and Malibu and Topanga. The fire also hit us during, the rainy season. We had our first flush storm later towards the end of January. And then a really intense storm on February 13th, or that peaked on February 13th. Those storms brought more debris, more contamination into our ocean. Heal the Bay, immediately wanted to know, what was going on. We knew we had to understand the contamination, and it was unclear what our agencies were going to do. We, historically work with bacteria, right? We're looking at part of our mission is to make sure that no day at the beach should make anyone sick. And maybe I should stop there and just do a little bit of background on who Heal the Bay is. Heal the Bay is a nonprofit based in Santa Monica, but we serve the greater Los Angeles area. Our mission is to protect and restore the coastal waterways of greater Los Angeles, and we've been doing that for 40 years now, with an incredible impact to our communities. We started with the Hyperion treatment plant that was discharging partially treated sewage, and now we focus a lot on stormwater capture. But again, the bulk of the public health issues around the ocean and recreational contact are around bacteria. These fires, these unprecedented mega fires, have brought additional contaminants that, quite frankly, we're just not used to working with. So we met with experts. We figured out what contaminants we needed to test for, and we went out and sampled north of the burn area. The currents in Southern California move south, and they move generally. And so we tested multiple sites within the burn area, and then we also tested south of the burn area to understand how far contaminants were traveling. We tested for 116 different pollutants. We looked at things like heavy metals, PCBs, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. You might see that more commonly just in the acronym PAHs. And we even tested for VOCs, although we were pretty sure that they would volatilize before we could get, before we got into the lab. So we really wanted to understand exactly what the impacts have been from these devastating fires on the ocean. People are watching debris and char wash up on the shore as far down as Redondo Beach. And, we're really concerned about what the impact was going to be, when it was going to be safe to swim again, when it was going to be safe to take their kids to the beach. We quickly realized that we didn't just have to worry about the water, but we also needed to worry about the sand. So we went out and we collected some sand samples. We partnered with Cal State Northridge for those sand and sediment samples. We haven't received the results back yet, but luckily the Regional Water Quality Control Board went out and did some sand sampling as well. The sand was sampled for heavy metals, PAHs and PCBs. We do have the heavy metals results back from the sand sampling, but we are still waiting for the PAHs and PCBs. And I will talk a little bit later, or I don't know, maybe if Ken will ask me now, or I'll talk a little bit later about exactly what we found. We just got our results back and finished analyzing them earlier this evening. So this is going to be breaking news here on this webinar.
Too bad we don't have one of those breaking news logos like they have on cable television, but we'd love to hear about that. So why don't you go ahead and share those with us, Tracy? That would be really good to know about. So if you're able to do that now, that'd be great.
Sure. So again, we tested for 116 different pollutants. And you have to kind of figure out what do these results mean, right? We don't have a baseline. We weren't out testing the ocean for these contaminants before the fires. So we don't know what was out there before. The other real challenge in figuring out what our results mean is that we don't have recreational standards necessarily for a lot of these contaminants. So a lot of the time we spent have been looking at, like, what are we going to compare these results to? And so right now, we have a couple different things we can look at. We can look at the ocean plan limits, which provide human health standards. That human health standard is based on consumption of fish, not recreational contact. We can look at drinking water standards, but nobody's going out there and drinking 64 ounces of ocean water. So, we just want to start by saying we don't have a lot of really good numbers. Again, because this is unprecedented, we are still working with experts on what is a risk threshold, an appropriate risk threshold to look at. So if we were just looking at the ocean plan limits, we saw that we did see elevated levels of PAHs and of beryllium. So beryllium is a heavy metal, and PAHs, the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. Those are typically associated with burnt vegetation, but can also have other sources from, we can see them after oil spills and such. Those both exceeded the ocean plan limits, the human health standards in the ocean plan limits. So we wouldn't advise that anybody go out there and start fishing and eating the fish right now. But I think and again, there were only 2 out of the 116 that exceeded those ocean plan limits. We recently got a little bit more information about some of the risk thresholds, and it looks like the beryllium numbers that we're seeing are below the human health limits for recreational contact. And then that just leaves PAHs. And that's an area where we still need to study before we can really understand what those levels are. I think one of the really interesting things about the water quality data that we're seeing is that it doesn't follow a lot of the natural trends and patterns that we see with bacteria. And that may be, there may be a couple factors that are in play there. But as you would expect, off of Big Rock in Malibu, that's the place where you see the images of a lot of those burned homes right on the beach and the waves lapping at that twisted metal. We see obviously elevated levels there of the fire contaminants. But we would expect that we would see peaks there, and we would see peaks at some of our storm drains. So some of the storm drain outlets where it's going to bring debris flow and contaminants from burned areas. Particularly looking at the Rustic Canyon outfall on Will Rogers Beach, because upstream of that storm drain, we have a watershed that is where a lot of the burnt structures are. And so we're gonna see, we were expecting to see a lot of contaminants there, and we did. But we also saw spikes at Santa Monica Pier and at Dockweiler, things that didn't seem related, directly to fire contamination. There aren't storm drains that are coming from burned areas in either of those locations. So we need to do a little bit more investigation. It could be where certain currents are pooling contaminants. There may be another source there. Again, we don't have baseline information. So there is a lot more that we need to do to investigate, to understand the data that we're seeing. And then we also need more data. We have very few data points. So once we get into having data that's been collected over regular intervals, we'll be able to have a better understanding of what's happening. And luckily, we have partnered with USC. So Heal the Bay went out and we did our testing in January. We tested before we had our first flush storm. That was the first rainfall in almost a year. And then we went out and tested again after that. This is not something we typically do on a regular basis, and was quite expensive. Testing for these contaminants can cost $3,000 a sample. And so we were very lucky and very grateful to partner with USC and Noel's team, and who have taken over this water quality sampling for us. And we're very much looking forward to supporting them and to seeing their results.
Great. Thank you, Tracy. Are you ready to move on now to Laura?
I'll kick it over to Laura, who's got a really great story to tell about some additional work that Heal the Bay is doing in the aftermath of these fires.
That was interesting. I do want to make sure I put it in the chat, but I want to make sure that everyone knows that if you have any questions for our presenters tonight, feel free to type them into the Q&A section. We will have a few minutes at the end of the presentation to ask them any of those questions. So feel free to put them into the Q&A. Next, we'll go over to Laura Rink, and I think I have a couple of questions for Laura. And let's see. The Heal the Bay science team, as I understand it, is involved, of course, in the post-fire recovery. Can you tell us a little bit about your aquarium project and what it's doing to protect local ecosystems, especially the tidewater goby?
Yes, that's the key word. Happy to share that with you. We'll first start off with explaining about what a tidewater goby is. And there is a picture in this slideshow that you might be able to stop on. There you go. All right. So somewhat of an unassuming, although personally I'm a little biased, but I think it's kind of an adorable little fish. They're bottom dwelling fish. So they are about 1 inch to 2 inch in length, so relatively small. What's unique about them is that they live in brackish water coastal lagoons and waterways up and down the coast of California. So they're a native species, and they are essential to these coastal fresh saltwater mixing ecosystems as a food source for many other different types of species. And so when they started disappearing in the 1980s, researchers and scientists became concerned because they could be an indicator of issues of off balance in the environment. And so in 1994, they were put on the endangered species list, and they are still researched and supported today through conservation efforts. And now if you fast forward to post fires, through a beautiful collaborative effort with the Cal State University Channel Islands, researcher there, Brenton Spies, also with the Resource Conservation District of Santa Monica Mountains and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They went out and collected roughly 750 individual fish, tidewater gobies, from the Topanga Lagoon in an effort to save this critically endangered species before any toxic runoff from the fires ran into their habitat and destroyed their ability to survive. So these 750 fish were then taken and distributed to 2 different aquariums. Heal the Bay is honored to be one of them. We took in roughly 160 of these fishes and are housing them in our back of house holding, providing daily welfare and care for these individuals. Honestly, I think they're a little bit on holiday. They're well fed, they're very protected, and given pristine water quality conditions. And so once the environment and the water quality in the lagoons, in Topanga Lagoon and surrounding areas clears up and is deemed as safe for the fishes to go back, we will be able to release them back into their wild habitats where they can hopefully continue to thrive and exist and support that local ecosystem.
Great. Thank you, Laura. Interesting. And I see that Tracy's answering some of the questions right now in the Q&A. So she's beating me to it, which is nice. And they're coming in. People are very interested. We'll go on now, and hear from Noelle Held, who I've already introduced. But Noelle, we'd like to hear from you. I think I've got a question for you. Obviously, collaboration is really important in this kind of work. How do you pronounce that? Protocean?
Proteocean. Yeah, it's
Proteocean.
not intuitive at all. We should work on
Not at
that.
You can tell
So,
I'm more
yeah.
terrestrial than I am marine. Proteocean. The Proteocean Lab at USC is one of the academic institutions that collaborates with Heal the Bay, which is really neat. Doing water quality testing in the coastal waters around Palisades and the burn zones. Can you tell us about the USC testing, about the lab and what you test for?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, sorry for all those technical words in my bio. I didn't mean to put them all there. So yeah, we call ourselves the Proteocean Lab, which is a combination of the word protein and the word ocean. And the reason we do that is because our day job, when we're not working on this really important problem, is to study the overall ecosystem services that are provided by marine microbes on a global scale. And we do that by looking at the proteins that the microbes make. So proteins are more than just muscle food. They're also the way that life kind of actuates itself. So they're enzymes and things that allow microbes to do important processes like photosynthesis. That's just so critical to the base of the marine food web. So normally we're out studying these microbes and the ocean on the global scale in big transects across the Pacific Ocean or across the Atlantic Ocean. But when this event happened in our community, we started to get really interested in it. And we really wanted to take the resources that we had in terms of lab equipment and expertise and try to give back to the community. And so I think Tracy and Laura gave a really great introduction to this problem that we're facing, which is that we're just trying to understand the full impact of these fires on the coastal ocean and then the ocean in general, because the ocean's all connected. So the things we're doing, we've been sampling off Santa Monica Pier every other day, pretty much from January 25th until March 5th. And so we have kind of a time course of sampling to look at nutrient concentrations, so ammonium and phosphate. Those are nutrients that can be implicated in starting harmful algal blooms, which we're seeing some evidence for now. We're also looking at metal concentrations, including the heavy metals like arsenic, lead, and aluminum, but also other metals like iron and copper and zinc. And so we're looking both at the toxicity effects of those metals, but also the potential to stimulate harmful algal blooms as sort of providing a fertilizer for those algae. And then we're also looking at organic contaminants, and we do this in collaboration with our friend Daniel Petras at UC Riverside. He's specialized in looking at organic compounds that are present in seawater that are what he calls xenobiotics. So these are anything produced by humans that aren't naturally present in the environment. It can include pharmaceuticals, plasticizers, phthalates, those PCBs and PAHs that Tracy was mentioning. But what's cool about his method is that we don't have to know exactly what we're looking for. He can kind of look in general and then tell us what's there, which I think is important for this problem, because we still don't really know what to look for exactly. We have ideas, certainly, but there can be kind of surprises, and I think Daniel's method will help us pick those up. And then the thing that my group is really specialized in, as I said, is studying the microbes. And so we think of marine microbes as the canary in the coal mine. So they're the base of the marine food web, and they respond really quickly to change. And we think that we might be able to see shifts in those marine microbes and use that as an indicator for the overall ecosystem health, maybe even before we see shifts happening at broader ecological levels like in fish or marine mammals. And so that's the question we're hoping to address in general.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Lots of questions. Many of them are like this. Do you think it's safe for Santa Monica residents to swim or surf in the ocean? If not, when do you think it will be? Lots of people are asking that. And there's some variations on that, but let's just go ahead and who would like to take that? Tracy?
I'll give it a shot. Yeah. It's not a simple question to answer. I wish it was easier. There are a couple factors that kind of weigh in on this. And one, I will say, risk tolerance is a highly personal decision. We recommend that people don't go swimming for 72 hours after a storm because of the bacteria levels that we see from that storm water. And there are plenty of people that see a storm and see a good wave and choose to take that risk. So, that being said, here are some factors that people can weigh in before making that decision. One is that the data that we have that's been made public is from January. The data we collected was from January. The regional board has published data for February 18th as well. So we'll be looking at that data, but that's still over a month old. And so because it takes so long to get results, some of the contaminants we're looking for can take 3 to 10 days to process. Things like PFAS that we've been looking at, which is a forever chemical, that can take several weeks. And so it's really challenging to get kind of real-time data in the same way that we can for bacteria. And that makes it really challenging to say, like, what's in the water right now. The second is that we don't have recreational standards to compare to. So it's, we're like I said earlier, we're kind of having to make these up. Luckily, there are a lot of really great toxicologists and public health officials that are looking at this data and trying to understand what is an appropriate risk threshold. What can we set these standards at? When, how often are people going to be in the water? What age are they? These are all factors that impact, how you will be affected by these different contaminants. And so I think we've got just before this call, we got, a number that we can use for beryllium, which was something that we saw hits of. And then again, we're still waiting on it for PAHs. I think there are some rules of thumb. You probably don't want to go out and swim right in front of the image that you're seeing online around Big Rock. I would avoid the burn area altogether. If you want to be extra safe, I would also say, let's wait till we have more data. But of the 116 contaminants that we tested for, it appears as though 115 of them are below what would be a human health threshold for risk of recreational exposure. We're still just really waiting for a little bit more information on those PAHs. And the water is one thing, the sand is another story. And so we have sand sediment data. And again, this is another area where we're trying to do some investigation. There aren't a lot of easy thresholds. We have standards for soil, but how you interact with your soil at home is very different than how you might interact with at the beach. And so when we're thinking about having our kids out there and they're picking up the sand, they might be, I've seen kids eat sand. So I think we need a little bit more time to study, the different exposure pathways that you might face from playing in the sand, and what those might mean. But with some extra precautions, I think it is safe to visit many of the beaches. Again, I would avoid the burn area. There's really not a lot of reason that anyone outside of debris removal professionals or residents should be in the burn area. But, I think you can just, safely visit our beaches as long as you avoid some of the debris. Wouldn't pick anything up with your bare hands. And certainly, particularly immediately south of the burn area and south, say between Will Rogers and Montana Avenue. take extra caution around for physical debris. We've seen nails wash up on shore. We've seen broken glass. There might be some physical hazards as well in that tide zone, in that, where the waves are washing up, and in that wet sand. So, I think there are both chemical and physical hazards that you could face. But if you go in aware and you take some extra precautions, you might be able to visit the beach.
Okay, a lot of variation still on that question. One asked about paddling. So I think, like you said, we all have different risk tolerance, but do you want to take that on? How does paddling compare to actually being in the water?
Well, that might depend on how good of a paddler you are. I think we want to avoid full immersion. I mean, again, this is being extra safe until we have that data and operating out of an abundance of caution. But if you're a great paddler and you're not falling off your board, that your exposure is pretty limited. I think we, as people who are, working in the public health space, and, we want to operate from out of an abundance of caution. And I just want to reiterate, like, we don't have the data to necessarily say that it's completely safe to go out into the water. But, it is really surprising how well the ocean is doing and how low, the low concentrations we're seeing of the contaminants we were most worried about.
Okay. So folks, I see a lot of questions going into the chat. I'll try to get to those, but the Q&A.
I was going to say, just if you don't mind, there's one quick thing I see on some of the animals that are washing up. This is information that I think that folks, we really want to address, and I might lean on Laura a little bit here as well, and probably Noelle, but there are a lot of people that are witnessing. I think there's a lot more attention on our coast, and we're seeing devastating, heartbreaking images of ill and dead sea life. We're seeing, sea lions and dolphins, and we had a pygmy sperm whale that washed up on shore. And I think it's really important for folks to know that we are experiencing a domoic acid outbreak. This is something that happens regularly. I believe this is the 4th year in a row that we have experienced this. This does seem to be particularly bad. We can't rule out that the fire might be related. The domoic acid comes after harmful algal blooms. Harmful algal blooms are the result of nutrients getting into the water and our oceans warming. And so, there were extra nutrients that made their way into the oceans after the fires. We're not saying there's no evidence to say that it caused the domoic acid outbreak, but may have contributed. It's not known. But I do want to separate, I think Noelle will speak a little bit to, the marine impacts from the contaminants themselves. But I think the acute things that we're seeing with the immediate impacts to marine life is from the domoic acid outbreak, and probably not from ingestion of metals or other things that would have more long-term impacts on their health.
Noelle or Laura, do you want to talk about that now? There are a lot of questions about that.
Sure, I'm happy to chime in. Yeah, I think what Tracy said is my interpretation of the data as well. So I think, if anything, the impact on the marine mammals that we're seeing is, if anything, indirect, and it's still not clear to me if it is a direct result of the fires or just general urbanization in Los Angeles. It's really hard to deconvolute those two things in the absence of the baseline data. But one thing that can happen is the input of nutrients stimulates the harmful algae blooms, which produce toxins. And so you have this kind of indirect effect, which we hope to be able to see in our microbial data, because the microbes are the algae forming diatoms that can sort of start that domoic acid feedback loop that can happen. But I think one result that, Tracy also alluded to, that's happened out of these fires is it's really placed the focus on our overall quality of our ocean in Los Angeles in general. And so the fires are certainly contributing to these problems, but also just in general, overall policy and overall actions within the city are also contributing to those problems. And so my hope is that one thing that can happen is that we just have more of this focus on the long-term monitoring effects, long-term monitoring of the fire, but also monitoring of urbanization effects on the ocean in general. And hopefully also some more effort to study from a scientific sense, the chain of events that happen when you have these inputs to this system.
Okay.
I think if I can add also, I think Tracy Noel said it all beautifully about the domoic acid incident, but I just want to add, you know, it affects them neurologically, the marine mammals. And so they are out of it and not feeling well. So please always stay away from them for the animals' safety and health and stress levels, but also for yours. They can be unpredictable when they're affected in this way. The Marine Mammal Care Center is doing their best. I know they're a bit overloaded with intake right now, but you can certainly call them if you see any sick animals on the beaches that they might be able to respond to, but just to stay safe and keep the animals safe by keeping a distance away from them.
Okay. Well, a lot of questions about the location where it might be safe or not safe to be swimming or being on the water or on the beach. Can you go over that again, rather than reading each and every one of them that says, is this specific place safe? Can you maybe paint the picture again? Tracy?
Yeah, so here's a map and it shows our sampling locations, and that sort of burnt orange color is the burn area. We are not seeing fire-related contaminants in the 2 testing sites north of the, or I guess west, but north of the burn area. So at Paradise Cove and Surfrider Beach, which you see there, we're not seeing elevated levels of fire-related contaminants. We are seeing them within the burn zone, and we are seeing them down as far as Dockweiler. We don't have any, but again, you know, not at levels that are would be dangerous for recreational contact, with the exception of PAHs, which we don't have information for. We don't have any data between Dockweiler and Malaga Cove. There are no testing sites in that area. Generally, we would assume that water quality would improve as you move south. Our currents move south, so it's going to pull some contaminants that way. But we aren't seeing that backed up by the data this time. We are seeing huge spikes at Santa Monica Pier and at Dockweiler. So I can't clearly say that there are no impacts in the South Bay. But again, for 115 of the 116 contaminants we tested for, those are below the risk threshold for recreational contact and could be safe. And the PAH, we just don't know where where those numbers will end up. So again, I think I said it in the Q&A section of the Zoom. PAHs are not something where you will get immediately sick. It's not like when you're exposed to elevated levels of bacteria and you're going to have an ear infection or a gastrointestinal reaction. These are not acute illnesses. These are things that it just raises your risk for long-term impacts that could be things like cancer. And so, you know, those are things that we all need to take into consideration when we're making these decisions. And hopefully in the coming weeks, we'll have a little bit more information about what the safe thresholds are for PAHs, and we can be more clear on what guidance would be. And, you know, hopefully we'll have that ahead of, you know, summertime. I know it's getting warm and we're all anxious to get to the beaches. But you know, I think it's challenging from a public health perspective to be really definitive right now because of the unprecedented nature of what we're facing.
Okay. Is there any info on the black stuff showing up on most of the beaches? Is it fire related?
It does, yes, it does appear to be fire related. This is likely ash that's mixed with sand, as well as some charred vegetation. There has been some testing of this material by government agencies. Again, we only have partial data back. We didn't see heavy metals in this, but we don't have data back yet on PAHs or PCBs. So again, it's really challenging to know what the impact of that is. But as soon as we have that information, we'll be sharing it on our website, www.healthebay.org. So we invite you to keep posted, and we generally post all of our updates on our social media as well. So if you're on Instagram, you can follow us at Heal the Bay, and we'll try to post things as quickly as possible. I think, you know, we've been working really hard with our government agencies to get them to post data. Unfortunately, they're, you know, and we were successful in doing it, but unfortunately, they're just posting the data. They're posting the lab sheets. Not super helpful for the majority of the public. So Heal the Bay is also taking some time to do the analysis to make sure that we can interpret the data for you and share with you what we know. So that will all be on our website.
Okay, a couple interesting questions that have come into the Q&A that I'll ask out loud. I'm struggling, Molly asks or says, I'm struggling to understand who is owning what components of the ecological recovery efforts. Who, what organization, government or otherwise, is owning what? I cannot find any conclusive data on the subject. It's a giant web of consultants, U.S. Army engineers, EPA, LA Public Works, California watershed, nonprofits, etc. Finding soil, water, and air sampling is equally difficult. Do you have any guidance here?
Yeah, well, as far as the studies that are going on and who's looking at it, if you go to the LA County Department of Public Health website, they have a list of everyone who is doing different environmental studies related to the fires. And so that's one place to look to just kind of understand who is studying this. Obviously, when you get to, you know, trying to figure out how to remediate or what, you know, ecological recovery looks like, the first thing that we have to do is to understand what we're dealing with. And we're still in that phase right now. Although it's been, you know, 2.5 months since the fires started, we're very early in understanding the true ecological impact of this disaster. So as far as, you know, who's responsible for what, you know, I've been digging into this a lot. My home was in the Palisades, or is still standing there. I'm currently displaced, but will hopefully be able to return someday. And I am really keenly interested on what I will be returning to and what the health impacts will be for me, and for the wildlife, which was a big part of the reason that I wanted to live there. And so, you know, I think that the short answer is that right now there isn't not a great plan from our government agencies on what that testing will look like. There's no plan to do soil testing. We are relying on the generous efforts of our academic institutions. We are doing, USC is doing soil sampling, UCLA and LMU in partnership with Purdue are doing soil sampling. I think there are some plans to do some additional air quality monitoring. There was some that was done. I think they drove through the streets and collected some air quality samples, but we're advocating for some more comprehensive air quality studies. There's a lot going on, but, you know, this is unprecedented, and it's very clear that we were unprepared for a disaster of this scale. We're going to be unpacking what happened here and how we can do better in future disasters for a very long time. And hopefully what can change here, you know, we're not the first place to ever have a mega fire. And I think we learn a little bit more every time. And what I'm hoping can happen here is that we can finally start to collect the data to help inform the next unfortunate member of this climate disaster club, so that they will be better prepared to respond.
Okay. Again, people are continuing to type things into the chat. That's a little harder for us to deal with. So if you could put things in the Q&A, if you want them actually asked on the webinar here, that would be more helpful. We'll try to get to the ones that are in the chat and as soon as the Q&A is done. Somebody in the Q&A asked, the char that is along the beach is very disgusting. Well, she's not asking, she's making a point. I know this is not your jurisdiction, but why isn't there a dictate to scoop it up and dispose of it properly? Hearing that it's getting combed into the sand is crazy. Thank you very much for your work, she says. That, by the way, is, oh, it's a he, sorry, Chris Russo.
Yeah, the char is disgusting. You know, I've visited quite a few beaches now and you know, tried to observe what's going on. I will say that you know, we have only preliminary data of what's in there, right? We've got one sample set and it's not complete yet. It does appear that it's not toxic or hazardous, that it's likely burned vegetation. And may actually cause more damage by removing that sand than it would by, you know, allowing nature to take its course. I know that's a hard thing to hear, especially when you see it and it looks so gross. You know, I am looking forward to seeing more data to verify that that is the case. But early testing does seem to show that that it's not harmful. Or it's less harmful than removing it would be. So I hope that helps to answer that. We will continue to study this and continue. This is, you know, science in action. You know, we're getting more information every day, and so you know, if assessment of that changes, we will be the first to let you know. You know, protecting our coastline, you know, is part of our mission. Is our mission, and so this is something we're watching really closely. But the information that we have right now does seem to show that that is predominantly, you know, that there aren't concentrations of contaminants in there that would be harmful for human or marine health.
Okay. Are there metals in the sand?
There are metals in the sand, yes. And we're waiting for the complete data set before we share sort of our interpretation of the data. We do have the metals data though right now. And so again, we're seeing elevated levels north of the burn area. The wind was blowing north there during the fires and within the burn area, but there's a pretty significant drop off once you get to Montana Avenue in Santa Monica. Regardless of where you are, we aren't seeing metals that are higher than health standards. So it does appear as though, at least from a metals perspective, it's okay. We did see a really weird hit of barium in Rat Beach in Redondo. I think everyone's still trying to figure out where that came from. It's still below background levels for soil. It may be from the landslide that hit Rat Beach a few years ago. We don't really know where that's coming from. It's higher than all the other beaches, but again, still lower than what you may see naturally in soil.
Okay, does a cleanup exist for sand and water, or do we have to wait for Mother Nature to do it naturally?
I think before we could answer this, we had to really understand what was in the sand and what was in the water. And so, you know, we are kind of at that stage now of analyzing the data, of getting more data. You know, this isn't an oil spill. This isn't something where you have something that's sitting on top of the water where you can easily remove it. These are contaminants that are mixing and are sort of throughout the water table. And, you know, that does create would create more challenges. I think the good news is that we're seeing much lower concentrations of those contaminants than we had expected. It still looks like they might be exceeding levels for marine health, and that's something we're going to want to continue to watch and going to continue to work with Noel on to better understand. But you know, this would represent a very challenging remediation effort if we were going to try to remove these contaminants from the ocean. And then from the sand, same thing. You know, we have a tough time just keeping sand on our beaches. It takes a lot of effort from the Department of County Beaches and Harbors to keep sand on to keep our beaches sandy here in Southern California. And so, you know, the effort to remove it would be quite challenging. And again, I think really luckily, at least based on the data we have, it doesn't look like it will pose a threat to public health.
Stone Helpern asked, due to the PCH being blocked off, I do not have the status of the EPA hazardous materials being sorted in Topanga Canyon following the rains. Can you speak of the current status of the disposal site and the impact on the flooding and on washing it into the ocean?
Yeah, so when we were made aware of the EPA choosing to or using the Topanga Canyon and Topanga Creek site for the household hazardous waste staging and sorting, we pushed back. We wanted to get we thought that there was probably better locations. The advocacy to move the site was unsuccessful. We were assured that it would be only a 30-day operation. And the EPA completed phase 1 at the end of February. Unfortunately, they are still using the site, to our understanding, for the phase 2 debris removal when hazardous materials are identified during debris removal. So they are still receiving hazardous waste at that location. We did go out and visit. Supervisor Horvath was able to get us an invitation to tour the site and to meet with EPA and FEMA officials. We looked at the types of mitigation measures they had in place in order to prevent run-on to the site and to prevent pollution from leaving the site. We thought that there were some things that they could do better, and we sent them a letter with some recommendations. I don't think we were the only ones to send recommendations for how to improve the site, but ahead of those major and really intense February 13th storm, that series we had that week, they did modify operations. So for the storm, they removed the lithium-ion batteries. They moved their operations away from the creek. They built up larger berms, and they deployed a few more best management practices throughout the site. I think, like much of the community, we would prefer not for the site not to be there. It is a major concern. Obviously, Topanga Creek is a both culturally and ecologically sensitive area. And we will continue to monitor the situation. It's one of our water quality testing locations. So we're looking at the water quality there, and we will be evaluating the site after they leave. But that's the latest information that we have on what's going on there.
Okay. We have more questions. If you got a little more time, well, I'd be glad to pass them on. This is an interesting one from Jack Bushell. Will the test give us good data on the long-term health risks of swimming and surfing, similar to how it took years to see the effects on those exposed after 9/11?
We will, the data will give us, it should give us some information on, like how you can plug in how often you're in the water, how long you're in the water, and what your exposure will be, what the concentrations are, and it'll kind of give you a sense of what is safe and what's not. And we'll be using that and providing some of that information. That we're not seeing contaminant loads into the bay at concentrations like people were exposed to after 9/11. This is, the recreational contact of swimming in the ocean. The contaminants are entering the ocean. And I think I saw this in one of the questions too. There's a mixing that happens in the waves and with the currents that dilutes those concentrations. And over time, those will continue to dilute. I think, the most important thing we can do to improve the health of the ocean is to get the debris removed. We've got something like 120 homes along PCH. Many of those have a footprint within the tidal zone, and every day contaminants are leaching from those. Once that debris is removed, that pollutant loading into the bay will stop, and the ocean can start to heal itself, and will start to mix and dissipate. And I think we'll look to Noel to better understand what's going on. Are those settling into the sediments there? What's happening with the marine life? But this is a different level of exposure than the folks faced after 9/11.
Okay. Let's see. And do we have an estimated timeline of when we will have those answers? Lots of specific questions that aren't easy to answer, are they?
These are great questions. My understanding is that we should have some clarity around the PAHs in the next couple weeks. I think maybe hopefully sooner. People are working really hard on it right now. But as soon as that's available, we will share it. So and we'll provide updates as quickly as possible.
All right, Stone Halpern says Stone, is that a he or she, is available over the summer and is really interested in giving back. What volunteer opportunities does Heal the Bay offer during that time, and how can people get involved?
We have a lot of volunteer opportunities. So now that we have more information on the sand and sediment quality data, we've started our beach cleanups again. So you can come out and join a beach cleanup. We have a lot of other opportunities. We do a lot of community science work. So you can come be part of our MPA Watch program. We will train you and you can make observations about sort of human interactions with our marine protected areas. We have a really cool eDNA community science program. So you can head over to healthebay.org and check out our volunteer tab and learn more about the volunteer opportunities. And we'll also, hopefully be posting some part-time positions and other things that are going to help us to be able to evaluate the data. So if you have a data background and you're interested in digging deeper into this data, please reach out. We've got a part-time data job out there right now.
Oh, all right. Are dates set for the debris removal in PCH?
They are working on that. I just met with the Army Corps this morning. I believe, again, there's, something like 120 homes that were destroyed. I might be off on that number. There were quite a few that were destroyed along PCH. It's my understanding that, so the way that it works is you have to opt into this program for the Army Corps to remove your debris. It's not just something that automatically happens. The deadline for that is March 31st. So if you know anybody who lost their home in either of the fires in LA County, make sure that they fill out that form. You have to sign it whether you're opting in or whether you're going to have a private contractor. So we have information for the folks that have at least either opted in or opted out. There are 45 homes, I believe, that opted out and are going to be looking for private contractors. So we won't have any information on the timing of that. That will be left to the homeowner. The other ones, the PCH area is a top priority for U.S. Army Corps. They've already started working. They're focusing on the La Costa area. I think next they're going to go to the Las Tunas area, and then they'll be filling in the gap as those right of entry forms come in from the homeowners. But my understanding is that their goal is for at least the Army Corps' properties to be cleared by June 1st. Again, I think we've got to think what we can do to encourage the homeowners of those other 45 properties that opted out to move quickly as well.
Okay. And let me see. So back to kind of the areas that it's safe to swim. People still have some questions about that. What is the nearest beach that is safe to swim and play in? Manhattan? In the sand?
Yeah, well, again, the north of the play in the sand. Yeah, so south of Montana Ave, we are seeing that the sand contamination levels are don't appear to be impacted by the fires. And again, the dry sand, that was primarily contaminated from ash deposition from the fires on January 7th. And since that time, we've had multiple rainstorms that likely pushed a lot of that contamination a little bit deeper. And we are not seeing levels above health standards for the contamination that we have right now. So I think if the trends continue with what we are seeing in the metals and they continue with PAHs and PCBs, then it should be pretty safe south of Montana. But if you want to hold out and wait for that additional data, we're hoping to have that later this week or early next week. And that will be available on the regional board's website. And then as soon as that gets posted, we will start our analysis and interpretation.
Zach asks, have any follow-up water samples been taken after the initial collection?
Yes. Noella, do you want to speak to that, the work that you all have been doing again?
Yeah, absolutely. But I was typing in an answer to a question. So what was the question again?
Someone asked if any sampling had been done after our initial January sampling.
Absolutely, yes. So we had the awesome opportunity to go out with Heal the Bay on February 10th. So that was I think their second big sampling effort all along the Malibu coast. And then we went out again and did sampling a week later on February 17th. So after a big rain event around Valentine's Day. So that was a pretty fairly big storm, and we sampled along the PCH again. We've also been continuing to sample off Santa Monica Pier, which is a little bit more accessible to us with the closure of the PCH, and we have sampling for that over the course of almost 2 months now. We'll try to continue that going into the future. So yeah, our goal is to keep that going as much as we can. We're doing this kind of like on a shoestring, and we're just trying to make it work. But I think it's really worth the effort to us, and we hope to keep going.
Hey. Lots of questions coming in the Q&A. Thank you very much for putting them in there. Molly Esperito asks, any word on using bioremediation, fungi, etc.?
Well, you want to take that one?
Sure, I'm happy to. Yeah, I think it's such a great and interesting question and concept. It's definitely something that many people are thinking about. My feeling right now as someone who studies the marine microbiome is that we just don't have enough information to really pursue those efforts on a big scale right now. It's certainly something that's worth thinking about longer term into the future, but I'm a little afraid of the unintended effects, especially when we introduce organisms into the ocean environment. And so at this point, I probably wouldn't recommend it, but I do think it's something worth thinking about.
Okay, and Brian asks a question twice now, so I'm finally getting to it. Brian, thanks for your patience. When can we expect an update regarding PAHs around Tower 26? Oops, lost it. Where did it go? Around Tower 26,
Sorry,
half mile south of Santa Monica Pier at the end of Bernard Way.
Yeah, I think, I don't know that that's a specific sampling site, but we will have, once we have information about that, what the appropriate risk threshold is for PAHs, which should come in a week or two, we'll be able to better interpret the data we have. And so we should be able to provide information on whether or not it's safe at Tower 26. So stay tuned. I would say, keep checking follow us on Instagram at Heal the Bay, and we will, as soon as we have information, we'll be posting it there.
Okay. Why don't we go until 10 after 6? Are you guys good on that?
Sure.
Because I have a feeling that we could be here all night. You guys have got really interesting information, very timely, and people have a lot of questions to ask. So go ahead and put them into the Q&A, folks, if you want to get them asked, and I will do my best to keep up and bring them on to our presenters. I noticed a ton of black soot and debris in the storm drain near Montana Avenue, and they built a sand berm to keep it from flowing to the ocean. When will this be cleared out manually? What happens? Will this be cleared out manually? What happens to that? Any idea?
Yeah, generally if I'm understanding the question correctly, those storm drain outlets are cleaned periodically, and after the storms, we did see the LA County Public Works out cleaning a lot of those, preparing for the intense storms that we were seeing. That I can dig a little deeper to see specifically on the Montana Ave outlet, but generally there are, those are maintained.
Okay, and then let me just say something that I've answered several times in the chat, but I want to make sure everybody hears it again. All of our webinars are posted a few days after they go out live, and that's on cirweb.org/webinars. So you can also go to the CIR webpage and just find it there under webinars. But John, if you would type that into the chat again so that people can see that link. You can see this webinar and a bunch from the last several years that you should find very interesting there too. Oh, here's a Tidewater Goby question from anonymous attendee, Noel. Can you talk about the tidewater goby and other affected marine life aside from what you've already touched on with marine mammals? You said that there was another site housing rescued gobies.
I think this is a question for Tracy because it was really
Or
Heal the
Laura.
Bay or Laura. Well, Laura, but Laura's not here.
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we lost
Maybe
Laura,
Tracy
who's our
can speak to it.
tidewater goby expert. So I'm not sure what the
Right.
other organization is that that received permission to do captive breeding and is currently housing endangered tidewater gobies. But you know, certainly these are in the immediate aftermath of the fire, a couple endangered species were rescued from our local brackish waterways. And tidewater gobies was one. Believe the other one was trout. I'm sorry, I should have been. I usually rely on Laura for this one. But we do have some endangered species, and so they were rescued by various organizations.
Okay. And I see you answered some of these as we're going along. Is there testing? Is anyone testing marine life for presence of all the toxins and heavy metals?
Right now we are not, so I don't know if Noel is. I mean, just Heal the Bay had been heavily or deeply involved in the DDT studies that happened after the discovery of the DDT and hazardous waste dumping zone off of Palos Verdes. So these are studies that have been done to understand the extent of fish contamination. I don't know of what's being planned in response to this, but maybe Noel has a good idea.
Yeah, so we are not measuring these levels in like mammals or fish per se. We're measuring them in the microbes themselves. And so our idea is that the microbes are the base of the food web. So they kind of accumulate this stuff potentially at this small scale, and then it can bioaccumulate in other animals, but that's not really our focus. We're really focused on the chemistry and the microbial side. I'm really interested in learning more about that. So I have been trying to, find out if anyone's is doing this. Certainly there are groups that rescue the marine mammals. And so I wonder if they're sending samples to experts in the macrofauna marine biology world, let's say. We're on the microfauna side, but yeah.
John just put a link in the chat where you can learn more about the tidewater goby rescue. I've also been asked to ask, who can we reach out to learn more about the part-time data role?
Check out Heal the Bay website. We just posted it today, so it will be on our career page.
Okay, let me see if I can find one more. Hard to pick from the several ones here. Let's see. Oh, how about this? Federal funding question. Does FEMA pay for any of the testing, or is that funded by local and state universities only?
I guess I can pop in. This is such an important question. I was trying to type an answer, concise
saw that.
answer. Yeah, our analyses at USC are being funded completely from our university funding and donations, basically from people who sell us lab equipment and vendors. They've sort of been awesome in helping provide us with access to certain things, but it's really on a shoestring. It's not really, there aren't great mechanisms right now in the academic science world anyways for funding fast responses to environmental challenges, and especially also to fund long-term monitoring science. It can be really challenging to fund that at federal and state levels. And so it's really been a challenge for us and a crash course in learning how to fundraise outside of our normal mechanisms at this point in time.
Okay, folks, gee, there are a lot more questions than we had time to answer. We've gone just a little bit late. We try to keep these at a reasonable time. So, Tracy, Noel, Jillian, you should come back and give us an update in 6 months or so. I think you talked to John about that. And clearly there's enough interest that we'd love to hear from you again. And so would our folks who joined us for our webinars. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
Okay. Anything else you want to add before we close tonight?
Sure. I will just add, first of all, thank everyone who's still on. It's really great to be able to share what this team has been working so hard on over the last few months. We are a nonprofit, and this is not work that we had planned for or budgeted for. So we've been dipping into our reserves to be able to do this testing and to provide this analysis. So if you do find this work important and you want to help support it, you can go to healthebay.org/donate, and any gift helps, even if it's $5. This is really important work, and we want to be able to continue doing it, but we do need support from the community. So if you're moved by our work, please consider supporting.
Excellent. And feel free to stay in touch with CIR. If you're not on our email list, you should join to hear about more webinars like this. We have dozens of people lined up for the rest of the year. So we're going to have lots of interesting webinars, and you can find those by going to our website, either just searching for Channel Islands Restoration, or the direct address is CIRWEB.org, like CIR, like webpage.org. So thank you very much again, guys. This has been a great get together this evening, very informative, and I appreciate everyone who attended. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you so
me.
much,
Bye.
guys.